Hi, I'm Sheila Kuehl. Welcome to another thrilling and thought-provoking episode of Get Used to It, a gay and lesbian issues discussion show. I'll bet you don't see or hear any of this stuff anywhere else on your television. Today I'm very happy to welcome as my co-host Phill Wilson, who is the founder of the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum. Welcome, Phill.
Well, thank you, Sheila. It's a pleasure to be here. Today's show is very, very exciting, and I'm glad to be the co-host.
Well, not as glad as I am. I'm really happy you're here. Our two guests in the opening segment of the show will be Kevin Spears, who is a member of the Holman United Methodist Church and former communications director of the SCLC of Greater Los Angeles. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
Happy you're here. And also Renee Williams, who is the coordinator of education and outreach at the Sojourn Shelter for Battered Women and Their Children, and also the chair of the Women's Caucus of the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you.
Glad you're both here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Mr. Co-host, do you want to captain the ship for the first part of this?
Sure. Now, the subject of homophobia in the black community is a really, really important subject. There's lots of dialogue going on and lots of energy around this subject. And I guess as a black gay man, I want to begin by asking the question, how does it feel as an African-American lesbian and as an African-American gay man when you experience homophobia in the black community?
I think it's one of the most dehumanizing and humiliating experiences to be in a situation, and with regard to myself, it's mostly in church. I do a lot of church work in the community. I work with a youth choir, and many times, especially during the holidays, my choir that I work with was performing, and there's always a point in a service or a worship experience where there is the invitation. And frequently, in the last couple months, the invitation became a litany of the demons or the things that young people are facing. Mm-hmm. And inevitably, the very first demon that's cited in the litany is the demon of homosexuality. Mm-hmm. And that is a very difficult experience for a young person who may be contemplating coming and joining a body such as the church. And then they hear this litany announced at the point that for them to come. So that's been very disturbing for me recently. And I think it all points to a level of retrenchment in terms of homophobia in our community, in the African-American community.
But often when you talk about an invitation to join or a young person hearing this, but it would still be unthinkable not to join the church. That really, right? It would be what you'd need to do is repress your own gayness or,
well,
be ashamed
I think
of that,
the response to that could be a couple of things. One could be to repress and oppress who you are in the context of the church and join that body or join that congregation.
And hide.
The other piece may be, well, this may not be the church for me, and I need to continue looking in other places. But what we're finding in more and more of our congregations, the situation is that that's the message, that's the signal that's being sent. So then we find young people in our community who are not connected with a church, who do not have exposure or access to education regarding their issues, and then we find that because of that, we have this, the issues in terms of suicide. I just got to talk to a young pastor today who told me about a brother who committed suicide. We have the issues of STDs, the issues of HIV, because the homophobia is oppressing and suppressing the knowledge and the education and the access that what young people need to survive in this society.
So the oppression prohibits people from being able to deal with the issues impacting their lives.
Exactly.
And to definitely echo what Kevin was saying in regards to the dehumanizing experiences that happen within our African American churches, I have also experienced that. I can remember spending time in church and actually directing and producing a play for Mother's Day. And at the end of the play for Mother's Day, my minister wanted to play for all the ills of society, drug addiction, homelessness, and homosexuality. And at that time, as an African-American lesbian, not out in, to my mother, but out in every other realm, it was very uncomfortable because you sit there and you realize that I don't need that prayer. I don't need to be freed in that way, which is also a tool if you have grown up in an African-American church. I mean, it has a lot of pull, it has a lot of power. The other part, as being an African-American lesbian, that becomes not just dehumanizing, but incredibly disheartening, that you see yourself every day getting up and doing good work in the world and in society, and that work just becomes so invalidated because you happen to be a lesbian. As an African-American lesbian, to hear from, also may I clarify by saying by recently coming out to my mother as an African-American lesbian.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Not very long ago. And actually, I came out to my mother the beginning of December of '93. And I had actually been out to my siblings for at least a year prior to that, a couple of years prior to that, actually, my older brother. And one of the things that came out with my mother was she talked about what how disappointed she was in me, and how sad and how much it saddened her, the type of woman that I've turned out to be. And it was really hard to hear that, because I had to let her know. I said, I work with people in this society that many of the people that you go to church with would step over. I have worked with homeless, unmedicated, mentally ill women. I've worked with battered women. I've worked with people who've been raped. All the people in society that many people just walk away from.
And many of them are our people.
And they are our people. They're all our people. And yet that good work was so invalidated because I am a lesbian, because I am now thought of as being abnormal, ill. And I'm not abnormal, I'm not ill. And it's really the fact that it's not in an effort of seeking approval to be who I am, because this is who I am, but asking to have that respect to be given. And it's really difficult, because to hear that from your own mother, it makes you, it saddens you, it upsets you, and also being reared to be respectful, it makes me have to address the issue to her on a very different level.
Well, it's also the question of a safe place. I know we were talking about,
Absolutely.
you were talking about that at dinner the other night, because I can only imagine what it's like being an African American out in the white world. It must feel real unsafe.
Well,
and so you have something to go home to, but
but not being able to go home is very difficult, because you're right. And one of the things, the reality is that the African American gay and lesbian community is a very small community. The gay and lesbian community is not always as welcoming and warming as it needs to be, or as we would like to see it for African American, lesbian, and gay. So we do have our own community within that community. And then you think about going home to talk about the issues that have happened, or the hurts that happen, or being upset. And it's very hard for me to go home, whereas my mother has said repetitively that she loves me very much, that I am still the same, and that I can come home. It is not the same, because I can come home under her terms, and those terms are to not come home with the person that I'm intimately involved with, which is not okay. And recently went through that during Christmas, and it was a very hard decision, and that decision was seen as choosing my partner over my family, or my partner over my mother, which was not the case, and trying to get her to understand that if I choose to come home without my partner this time, I have set a precedent to make that okay.
Well, I mean, you kind of lead into two other thoughts that have crossed my mind. One is this whole issue of values and how we relate to family, and I find it a bizarre experience when people suggest that somehow our values are different because we're gay or lesbian. And it's very interesting. In my family, I was home for Christmas, and we have my parents' anniversary is Christmas Eve. So the holiday seasons are full. We have an anniversary party on Christmas Eve, then we celebrate Christmas, and then we celebrate Kwanzaa. And as a part of the Kwanzaa celebration, my brothers and I sat down and we're talking about our wishes and our dreams and our hopes. And it's very interesting as I talk to my 32-year-old heterosexual brother, who's the father of 2, and I talk about what he wants out of his life. Or he talks about what he wants out of his life, and I talk about what I want out of my life, and the things we want, we want to be happy, we want to be able to work and to be productive in our lives, we want to take care of our families, and they're the same, they're identical, and so, they are the same.
And the word values some of the words that we're hearing now that are coming from the religious right and coming from some people now calling them the religious supremacists, those are catchwords.
Absolutely.
The word values is not appropriate when you're talking about a person in terms of their orientation and who they choose to love and be with and spend their lives with. It's not a value decision. It's a decision of who you are. It's a decision of your heart, of your mind. So values is an inappropriate word. Even persons who are heterosexual, who are Christians, who are holy or spiritual, have compromised values. So the issue is not values. The issue is people looking for affirmation, who they are and how they were created. There's a lot of catchwords that we have to be very careful about in the African American community. Values, Christian, born again, saved, holy. Those are some catchwords that have been co-opted by other forces
to perpetuate hate.
That's right.
And we as African Americans, as young people, as activists, as church activists, as members of the interfaith community, as HIV/AIDS activists, as overall gay activists, but we as African Americans, with all those hats that we wear, have to be very careful when we see those type of words appearing.
Well, do you think the community is vulnerable to the sort of the approach being made by the right wing? I mean, I understand the right wing has really targeted the community
absolutely.
to drive a wedge,
Absolutely.
you know, between the
Absolutely.
kind of the two
I do a lot. I'm a church person. I do a lot of churching, okay, and I do it because Phill is busy, this sister's busy, and there's not all of us who are in that loop, and so I intentionally do it, and I'm monitoring what preachers are saying, what happens during the invitation, what type of messages the evangelists are sending, and it's very prevalent, and like I said, I think it's growing, and we have to be very intentional and strategize about how we're going to send the right signals.
You know, one of the things that crosses my mind is there's this question about loyalty, you know, and I know you do a lot of work in the women's community, Renee, and I know that certainly was a test of black feminists, and the loyalty test plays out like this, you know, are you black or are you gay? You know, are you African American or are you lesbian? Or are you lesbian first or are you African American first? Are you gay first or are you black first? Is that a legitimate question?
No, it isn't a legitimate question. And I say that because when I come to you as all that I am. I'm an African American lesbian womanist. That is all who I am, which means that, and when I identify myself as that, it's saying that I recognize that my power, as well as my primary oppression, comes out of my color, out of my sexual orientation, also out of my gender. And I come to you as a total and complete person. And what we are asking as African American lesbian and gays is simply to have mutual stretching between the two. I mean, I am still African American woman. I work just as hard to work towards the issues of racism as I do towards any of the issues of homophobia. And it's really hard because you are being forced to choose. And working in the women's movement is one of the frustrating things that came out of that. You know, are you a woman or are you a black woman? You know, let's separate the two. I acknowledge that my issues as an African American woman are different than my white sisters, and we have worked diligently together to build those bridges and also to have respect on the two. But it's not for me to choose. I'm not going to choose. How do I separate who I am?
But it's also a neat way to drive a wedge between African American women with, you know, with lesbian baiting or whatever.
And it's a powerful tool because all of a sudden, you know, if you walk up to a sister and you say, oh, is your name Lisa? You know, that's okay. You know, did you go to another university or something, but suddenly you say, are you a lesbian? And this woman becomes totally immobilized. She cannot move, and she will not deal with you because, one, you are a lesbian, and please don't let a straight brother call another straight sister a dyke, because once that happens, it's like she'll do everything in the world because it's thought of as being a horrible, dirty, filthy thing, and that's not true.
Well, you know, what about the comment that somehow our sexuality undermines black manhood?
That isn't true. As a lesbian...
So you being a lesbian is not a commentary on black manhood, and you're being, you and I being gay men is not a commentary on our manhood.
I think it challenges. I think it challenges what we say we should be as African American lesbians and gays and as women and men.
It also challenges I'm sorry.
It challenges us because it says that to grow up and be productive in the society, you're going to stand next to a very strong man. Now, as a lesbian, it does not mean that I hate men. I don't hate men. Some of my best friends are men. They're males. I love men. I mean, realistically. I said, but what it does, you know, and that's what people think. And I mean, I feel that some of the cruelest things that I have ever heard hurled at brothers have come from my straight sisters. They have been able to demobilize these men and take them off at the knees. And these are the women who say that they love them, have been some of the most hurtful things.
I think the only women I ever heard that had it in for men were straight women, because they had so much more to do with that than we do. But the other thing is, don't you think it gets back to a definition of what it is to be a man? If it means you got to possess some woman and make her do what you want, and that's it, then we all fail, kind of, at that.
Yeah, there's a quote that Cornel West did recently, last spring. And he was talking about manhood, and he was saying when young African American males talk about manhood, they're talking about controlling a woman. And Cornel West says, but is that really what it is? It's not the same. It's not always that. And we as African American males, or African males, I consider myself an African male, and I'm trying to move to that point. I'm an African male, and I love other African men. Okay, and that's the definition that's comfortable for me. But when we talk about manhood, we have to look at what are we really talking about?
But that's the answer to Phil's question. It doesn't necessarily take away.
But I guess I'm saying it for the heterosexual community. If you look at the struggles that people like Phill Wilson and Roger Pamplin and Bishop Carl Bing, we and they have gone through in the last decade. All the issues of doing public policy and doing legislation and protesting and marching and advocating for individuals and providing housing and food and medicine. That's manhood. So, you know, I look at us as warriors. We are warriors in a battle for our identity, for our affirmation, and then for our brothers and sisters who are ill.
We are taught as African Americans from the time that we are born to be proud of who we are, and it comes out of the thought that we're all going to be heterosexual. I mean, it's okay to be proud of who you are as long as you're thought that you're going to be heterosexual. My mother says, I bore you, I know who and what you are. Then she should also be very comfortable with the fact that I'm a lesbian, as she knows who and what I am. And yes, I'm proud to be an African American lesbian. I'm very proud. I've been taught from the time I could breathe to be proud of the woman that I am. And I'm not any less proud because of the life that I lead. And it's a good life. It's a full life, and it's real important.
But it adds another layer of pain, doesn't it? I mean, that's the whole point, it seems to me, of hatred of any kind, is to slow you down, so that you don't get to where you're going.
Well, you know, it kind of goes to the question of, is the black community more homophobic than the larger community? And I don't buy that. I don't accept that. But I have to admit that I do think that African American gay and lesbian people, when we experience homophobia in the black community, it is a more painful experience for the following reason. I believe that our parents and our families, you know, they tell us that at some point in time you're going to go out in the world. Now immediately that's a message that there's a difference between out there and here.
Right, and that's the world.
Right, and that's the world. And you're going to survive and you're going to thrive because you're going to know, no matter what they do to you, no matter what they say to you, no matter how they try to hurt you, if it gets to be too much, there are folks back here that will take care of you. There's a safe space. And we know you can come on home. And when you come on home, you don't have to explain it, you don't have to talk about it, because we've been there. Now, when it happens that we discover that we're gay or we're lesbian now, and we discover that for some reason we can't go home, or we can't go home in the same way, because, you know, of course, when I'm called a nigger and I go home, my mother has had that experience. My father has had that experience. Now, but the day that I'm called a faggot, you know, and I go home, now, even though in my particular case, my mother and my father, they love me, and they certainly, they empathize with that. Now, I mean, they sympathize with that, but they can't empathize with that. They don't know what that's about. For a lot of us, the people who are hurling the epithets are people who are from our community.
Right.
And so when we lose that safe space, it can be a very devastating experience.
I think what I'm trying to move myself to the point where I feel comfortable in stopping certain things. I'll give you an example. We have a lot of health food stores in our community now, in the Crenshaw community in Los Angeles. And I have been in the health food store, and Clinton was on the air regarding the military issue. And people were saying, well, why don't they just go back and be quiet? And that's at the point where we have to say, wait a minute, you don't know who's in here with you, and you need to look at this a different way. More and more, we have to find opportunities if we're at lunch with people on our job, if we're at church, or if we're in an organization such as a sorority or fraternity or the YMCA, YWCA. When those type of comments are made, we have to say, stop, wait a minute, I'm at the table. I'm here too.
Is it happening in the community now? Because I think...
You mean those people doing that?
Well, I think early on there were African-American people, although the racism in the movement, which we talked about in an earlier show, makes it real hard to feel comfortable working in the movement. But a lot of African-American people got through that. The leadership forum was very important. People were working on gay and lesbian issues. And it seemed to me that it became difficult, but is happening more and more, to working in terms of working in the community, or maybe that was always going on. So that people, I mean, it seemed like sometimes there were a lot of people trying to work on gay and lesbian issues, but it was hard to go home and work.
About working in the community, there have always been African-American gay and lesbian people working on race issues, poverty issues, health issues, women issues. Now, have there always been African-American gay and lesbian people working on gay and lesbian issues in South Central and Harlem, on the south side of Chicago, and Brooklyn, those places? I think that that is a relatively new phenomenon.
But a growing one? I mean,
Hopefully.
when you say this is what we have to do you see that it's
I
happening?
realize a lot of people are not there yet. They don't have that comfort level. But when you talk about coming home, the church that you introduced me coming from, it's a comfort, safe space for me. It always has been. I've never had to be confronted by any type of ridicule or bashing or questioning about who I was in the context of my church. Now, I'm an exception. I'm very fortunate. And the same goes in terms of my home life with my family. So there's only there's a few of us who I believe now have that comfort level. If we're in public events or we're at civic events, like this is King Week this week here in Los Angeles. And the speaker today, who is an African-American male, one of the speakers, said some very affirming things about lesbian and gays and bisexuals and about homophobia. So his comfort level was at the point where he felt comfortable in saying that in an interfaith environment. So some of us are at the point there, and I think what we have to do is help empower the rest of our community. So when they're in those type of situations, they can say in a very non-confrontational way, but say, you can't make that comment while I'm sitting here. You can't say that while I'm in the context of this meeting. You can't say that while I'm sitting here eating in this restaurant.
Well, Renee, I want to ask you a question that Kevin kind of raised, and that was in the health food store when you talked about why couldn't they just be quiet? And I guess the question I want to put on the plate is that if we accept, and I for one feel is very true, that the black community already has a full plate. Now, does our community have the resources, have the wherewithal? Is it important enough for us to deal with this question of homophobia or the question of homosexuality at all? Or is that a diversion from the issues that are really important to us?
We do have the energy. And that's what it comes down to. Do we have the energy to address this issue? Yes, we do. And do we need to? Yes, we do. We use the term homophobia over and over again, and I guess the difficulty in addressing that, more widely known, is that it is homophobia, but to also focus on the fact that it has a lot to do with heterosexism, the assumption that we all are going to be born and be heterosexual and live heterosexual lives and have heterosexual access, and that does not happen. It's important for our African American community to realize that you and I have just as much value in that community as our heterosexual brothers and sisters. It is important that we unitely come together and address this issue, because we are at the table. They know that we're at the table. They know that. They know it full-heartedly. But it's okay that we're there and we're silent. Silence serves one purpose, and that gives the oppressor power. The oppression will never be broken until we give voice to the issues that have oppressed our people and others for so long, in order for us to fully recognize the entire power of our communities as a whole. I mean, it only separates us. And we need to do that. And there's no harm in doing that. And we're not saying that everyone has to jump up all together and say, okay, this is a great thing, because we're not asking for anyone's approval for this to be a great thing. We're asking for people to respect it. I mean, and then that's the part that becomes so, I guess, stressful, for lack of a better word. I mean, I look at our community and people say, well, God, we have to deal with racism. You know, we can't start dealing with this. We have to deal with sexism between our brothers. We can't deal with this. How is it that you choose? How is it that you decide that this issue is of value? There we go again with that catchword, and this one isn't.
Well, capitalizing on the word choice, I had a minister say to me that you can't compare racism with homosexuality. Now, because this is a black minister, I was born black. I didn't have a choice about that. You chose to be homosexual. Now, and so you can't compare the two. And in fact, now if you are punished by that choice, then that's okay. Now, but you can't punish someone for being born black because they didn't have a choice in that matter. What do you think about that, Kevin?
I think I was born who God made me this day, today. There's no choice, and I don't know how many different ways we could say that. Now, I think when we talk about ministers, and I want to talk specifically about the church and the homophobia, the other issue that's related to this is the hypocrisy of our leadership. And it's a very sensitive, but it needs to be said. We have a problem with leadership and clergy leadership who are living dualities in their lives. Okay, now maybe something happened in those persons' lives that made them choose to engage in homosexual behavior. As it relates to me, it wasn't a choice. This is who I've always been since before kindergarten. But I think we have to work to find some tools and some way of educating people in our community that it's not a choice, that these are feelings and emotions that build up in you over your whole life experience. And it's not a choice.
Well, but there's two different things, though, Kevin, I think that they mean, or that I hear. One of them is, let's say it is a choice. I say it's a choice to be Jewish, too. And if they said to you, look, all you have to do in order not to be thrown into camp is you kneel down and kiss the cross, and you'll be just fine. Which is saying you can be it, but you can't, you know, you can't live it.
The sin is not the being, the sin is in the saying.
Right.
Well, I guess with me personally, I'm not prepared to negotiate whether it's a choice or not. This is who I am. This is who I've always been. I was the type of young man, I never even tried to create the perception that I had girlfriends or female friends. I had female friends, great famous friends, but I never even tried to bring a young lady home.
But the other thing is you could hide it. I mean, people can hide it, and they do hide it, and that seems to me to be one of the things that the minister is saying as well.
But the question is that a gift or is that a curse?
But the bigger issue is that gays and lesbians are leading their lives. You know, the way that I choose to lead my life, why does that keep heterosexual people up at night? Okay, that's what I'm saying. It's why is the way my choices in my life keeping heterosexual people up at night, causing them great anger, causing them to want to stone my brothers and sisters because of how I have if so be it, chosen to live my life, if indeed that has happened. The other thing is why is it the way as I choose to identify who I am such difficulty for other people? I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm not telling you to do this.
No, that's right. And you're right. And of course, we always get into one of the most interesting issues when we've got like 1 minute left to talk about it, because I think you said we don't have enough time to explore the question of am I born this way or do I choose it? But it seems to me that part of what you were saying about what you're stopping in terms of the talk and stuff is it's irrelevant whether we're born this way or we choose it. That is, we are this way, we have a right to be this way, and we can say it.
And Renee, people are going to be really talking about this subject in February in New Jersey. And as we end this segment, why don't you tell us about that?
What's coming up in New Jersey is the 7th Annual Black, Gay, and Lesbian Leadership Conference, and it will be in Secaucus, New Jersey from February 16th through the 21st. And it's going to be a very exciting time, and we hope that every single African-American, lesbian, and gay person is there.
Well, thank you both very much. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Renee. Stay with us. Phill and I are going to talk for the second half of the show with the Executive Director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference here in LA, and I bet that's going to be interesting too. Joe Hicks will be with us. Stick with us.
It would be nice if latex condoms were automatic. But since they're not, using them should be. Simply because a latex condom used consistently and correctly will prevent the spread of HIV.
Welcome back to Get Used to It. I'm Phill Wilson. I'm your co-host today, and I'd like to introduce our next guest, Joe Hicks, the Executive Director of the Los Angeles chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Thank you for being here.
I'm very pleased to be here.
So our subject today is homophobia in the black community. Before we begin, actually, I really do want to say to you that I've watched your work, and it's really, really exciting what you're doing and what the Los Angeles chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference is doing.
Well, I appreciate you doing that and saying that. You know, we're trying to do some good work when we can and wherever we can.
Well, as we tape this show, this is King Week. And I actually think this is a very appropriate subject to talk about this week.
I do too.
And so from your perspective, I guess the question that I have is what does the black community lose, if anything, by embracing homophobia? Is it a freebie? Do we get something by being homophobic, or do we lose something by being homophobic?
I think we lose a tremendous amount, Phil, by not wanting to accept and relate to people within our community who may be gay or lesbian. We were talking just a bit in the break about people like James Baldwin, great historical figures that people don't want to own up to or want to hide or forget about. But in terms of the drain of people we may be losing who could be in communities struggling, people do that anyway. But the fact is, why do we make it painful and more difficult? So I think we lose a lot by people who simply give up and just go, live their lives quietly and not engage in struggles within community, because it's often made very difficult for people who are openly identified as gay or lesbian.
But don't they do the work anyway, Joe? Do you know what I was thinking when Renee was talking earlier in the show about all the work that people do, working against racism, working against sexism, doing the work for the homeless or all that stuff. Don't people, gay and lesbian people, still do their part in the community, but they have a higher burden?
Well, sure they do. They have always, they do now, but the point is, how do we know the number of folks we're losing who just simply give up and refuse to engage in that? So we don't know what that toll is. My assessment is we do lose a lot in terms of people who simply don't want to persevere through that, and it's not necessary. We should accept people who come to the work, whatever their orientation is or whatever other kinds of things they bring to community work.
Or even if we come to the table, if we come to do the work, if we have to be diverted by this issue, we are not able to contribute to our greatest potential.
Well, there's also another backward political drain in terms of the work of the black community. If we don't understand what civil rights and human rights are, and we close off to a whole segment of our community and don't accept them as full partners at the table around the struggle for human rights and dignity, all the kind of things historically black folks have fought for and other people in this country, then we're losing. So the point is that we have to, in terms of where the level is, what the ethics, what the morality of our struggle is, unless we accept the fact that we have to struggle for all people who are discriminated against, whatever their issues are, then we lose, ultimately lose in that. And it draws down, it debases the level of our struggle if we don't understand and include everybody's struggle in that internal struggle within the black community and the national struggle as a whole.
There is not, however, a great deal of agreement about that in the community, as I've heard. I mean, it seems as though you've been very outspoken, and I don't know whether you take any heat because of that from the larger black community. Outspoken that you see the relationship between gay and lesbian rights and the civil rights movement, which is the black civil rights movement.
Although I think that there's something else going on, because I actually experience it differently. Now, recently during the gay and lesbian and military issue, Coretta Scott King came out saying that the ban should be lifted. Reverend Lowry from Atlanta, there was a major press conference, a historic press conference in Atlanta, saying that this is a stupid ban, that it unnecessarily disenfranchises folks. And it really was ignored by the media, and I think that that's part of the joint marginalization that happens.
Yeah, but you're right. I think there has been a move on the part of major civil rights organizations to, in fact, though slowly, I might add,
yes,
join that struggle. And I think there should be some criticism levied correctly on the slowness to, in fact, say that and come out on that issue. See, I think the issue for me personally, as well as politically, organizationally, has been not to be politically incorrect, to twist that phrase, but to simply do what is the right thing and to struggle for people who are struggling and need to be reached out to and include them. As I think King, if King were alive today, I can't imagine him doing anything other than that, of understanding that people's rights need to be struggled for. They're very simple issues, and people jump through a whole lot of hoops to complicate them unnecessarily. And I think a lot of that is the political influence of the fundamentalist right. And we heard Kevin talking earlier about the black faith community, and there are some intertanglements, if you will, between the Christian white right and fundamentalist churches in the black community. So there's some of the lack of morality, if you will, that gets transferred into this issue about, well, you don't want to struggle with them because what they are doing is immoral. So this misguided sense of what our morals, what our values, as we heard earlier, is really something that a lot of ministers who aren't necessarily the most progressive, and I understand this is a big, unsettled theological debate within the faith community. I'm a political activist. Yes, I run an organization that has deep roots in the black faith community, but in terms of what our mandate is, in terms of struggling for human and civil rights, I can't imagine us, and I can't imagine myself, because I had a political life before I became the director of SCLC. I can't imagine myself doing anything other than the kinds of things that I'm doing, which is being out front of this issue when and if and when I'm offered and asked, like I am here today, because I don't hide the fact that we stand with our brothers and sisters, both black and white, by the way, who are struggling on this issue of homophobia.
You went to Colorado.
I did, in fact, and I feel very good about that. I was asked by the defense team to fly to Colorado and testify, and it was the same issue in Colorado. By the way, the issue there was that the Amendment 2 case was up before the Colorado courts again and was being challenged. And in fact, has been now overturned, and I'm glad that if I was able to play any small role in aiding that. But it was exactly the same issue because the Christian right, white right I might say, had gone into black and Latino communities and said, these people are rich, these people are well educated, they don't need protections, plus it's special protections, it's special rights. And you don't want your history slandered civil rights, proud civil rights tradition, slandered by those folks being part of that.
Well, you know, it's very interesting because today as we speak, there is a video that's targeting the black faith community, and it's called Gay Rights, Special Rights, where they in fact, you know, cynically do that wedge, and they begin by using, you know, Martin Luther King and fast forwarding to the April Gay and Lesbian March. I had an interesting experience in that I was one of the speakers this August at the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington. And as I got up to speak, there were a number of people hearing my introduction and hearing who I am who booed me. But I persevered and I gave my speech. And what I thought of at that time and after was Bayard Rustin, who was actually a political mentor of mine, and to compare the march that Bayard participated in 30 years ago to this march, as Jesse Jackson said, they needed Bayard last year. And the thing that I'm reminded of was his fundamental principle, and that is that oppression is of a whole cloth, that is interconnected. Now, that you can't take a part of oppression, the part that offends you, and cut it out and think you can wear the cloth. You know, that the oppression of racism and homophobia and sexism are all connected.
Well, Phill, I'm sorry. But what is so absolutely bizarre is that some of the same forces that some elements in the black community are linking arms with on this issue of homophobia are the same forces that are calling them niggas.
Right. Excellent.
So for people to get in bed with the worst enemies of black folks and women and minorities all across this country and think that there's some reason to band together on some common cause is going to be just the worst disaster in the world. So it's worse than just bad bedfellows, if you will.
Well, it's total manipulation by the right wing. They know just what they're doing.
Of course.
I mean, it's the same thing they said, talk about special rights. Affirmative action was a special right. That's the whole way they painted it.
Yeah.
You know, why do they want more than what we've got kind of stuff. So it's a much, like you, as you say, it's much
well, and that was the whole premise of the Amendment 2 case, was that in fact, these were lawyers out of the Attorney General's office of the state of Colorado. And my understanding was that luckily the more progressive, the more accomplished ranks of the Attorney General's office in the state of Colorado begged off and said, we're not going to deal with this case. We refuse to defend what we disagree with. And they kept going through the ranks of the Attorney General's office until they found some of the worst people that they could, who then said, yes, I'm down for that, because I don't like them gays, right? But it's interesting that they in fact tried to use that same exact argument, that these people aren't worth defending. A, what they're doing is immoral. B, they're privileged white folks. Why do you want to then link that with the cause of people who have historically needed protecting?
That also makes black, gay, and lesbian people invisible. I mean, to be characterized, to have the gay and lesbian community characterized as rich, well-educated, and white is like a double whammy, where they say, well, you don't exist at all.
Well, and that's part of the work that the gay and lesbian community has to do. What was disturbing to me watching this video was that all of the images from the Gay and Lesbian March were white images. You know, and I was one of the keynote speakers at that march, and I kept wondering, you know, where am I? Where are the black gays and lesbians? Where are my people in this on this issue? And that's part of the cynical bridge that happens. You know, there's a book that I'm sure you're familiar with, and I am going to paraphrase it, but the book is all of the women are white, all of the blacks are men, but some of us are brave. And as I paraphrase that, you know, all of the gays are white, no, all blacks are straights, but some of us are brave, some of us are both. And it's kind of an interesting phenomenon.
I agree. But I think we talked earlier about, you know, what that, of course, doesn't indicate, and it gives it's a lie, because we all know that the gay community is very diverse. Yeah. You know, everybody who's a gay or lesbian is not a well-educated, rich person. I mean, there's a wide range of folks, all the way from people who are poor to people who are, in fact.
Privilege does make it easier to come out, though. So, I mean, I think we do see more white people out at the marches and that kind of stuff. The risk gets much higher, you know, for what you're going to lose in terms of your work and your security, etc., when you are poor and less likely.
That's of course true, which is one reason why the demographics can be perceived that way, because if you're, you know, a schmo boxing groceries at Boy's or Ralph's, you know, given what that working condition may be like, it may be different than if you are a privileged person where your position might allow you to more comfortably make that statement.
There's also a kind of feeling you were talking about the other night, I think too, Phill, of this notion of scarcity.
Right. And, you know, and the issue is, and because I've been wrestling with this, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and say that there's a rational reason for people to feel the way they do, because then that allows me to think of rational solutions. So one of the theories that I came up with is this myth of scarcity, that if you find the people who believe that resources are finite, and that there are too few, that there are fewer resources than there are the people that need those resources, then you have a dynamics where people have a reason to invest in denying other people access. So if we look at that on the question of race and sexual orientation, if the pie is too small, and if I believe that if gays and lesbians get their piece of the pie, by definition, those of us who are African American or other people of color, there will not be enough of the pie left for us to get. Now, as opposed to challenging that notion and saying, if more of us work together, now if we expanded this quilt of humanity, that we can expand the pie.
Well, one of the most bizarre arguments advanced in Colorado was exactly that the resources were not going to allow them, even if you guys force us by law to protect gays and lesbians. There's not enough resources to do that. We're already stretched too thin. You know, the enforcement arms in Colorado already been cut back to the bone and blah, blah, blah. We can't do it. So the line went, so they happen to be left outside the door. That's just tough. We got women, we got minorities in, and you know, but that's it, no more. Which is a very cynical kind of position to take, which says if you didn't get in the door by X point, you just get left out and you just have to suffer discrimination forever. Well, I think that's an absurd notion. I mean, it's absurd on its face. And you know, the question was asked earlier in that same vein about making choices within the black community. What struggles do you struggle around? You know, well, we're dealing with racism, we're dealing with economic discrimination. We don't have energy or time to then talk about discrimination that black gays or lesbians might face. That has no value whatsoever. Those are choices that ethically or morally we simply can't make. You struggle for the people who need to be struggled for, and the struggle, as you point out, is to make that pie inclusionary. And that goes across, I mean, we could talk about a range of other struggles about immigrant rights, for instance. Absolutely. You know, later for those folks, they're not supposed to be here anyway. So you know, there are all kinds of politically backward arguments that people make about folks that they like to see discriminated against, you know. So we can't buy into that sort of choice thing about who gets struggled for and who doesn't. And particularly within the black community, the kind of historical struggle where we have always fought for, you know, folks who needed to be rallied around, we can't now say, no, black gays and lesbians can't be part of this struggle. That makes no moral, ethical sense whatsoever, and politically it makes no sense.
Is there any expense to you at being supportive, just personally? I mean, sometimes what happens I see in an office, and I'm thinking in terms of sort of women's stuff, that a woman's harassed in the office, a guy comes to her rescue, kind of, says to the boss, you know, this is happening to so-and-so, I don't like it. He begins to be treated differently. He may be a feminist, you know, it might be something not loyal. Does that happen in terms of, because you've been very supportive, I think, and I wonder whether there's any expense to you personally.
Well, I'm personally very comfortable with my own sexuality. Secondly, it's
so you might be accused of being gay.
See, in fact, a lot of people do get gay baited who stand up and will be supportive of gay and lesbian struggle. People say, well, you know, he's probably one of those, you know. First of all, I wouldn't care if they did that. I mean, people can make whatever kind of assumption they want to make. But secondly, particularly with my history in this city, this country, with my political struggles, folks know me going back to 25, 30 years in terms of my political involvement when I did all kinds of crazed, insane things in this city in the name of the revolution. So it's very difficult for people to then challenge that. So they got to take it for what it is, you know. And that's not, again, my establishing my kind of macho kind of credentials either. It's just a statement of fact that people can't come at me like that. You know, so they got to find another way to figure out, well, what's going on with Hicks and SCLC, because Hicks is, you know, he's been clearly supportive of some issues that make some people just a little uncomfortable. Well, you know, I think to be an organization that has any credentials in terms of revolutionary potential, and revolutionary, you understand, doesn't have that scary kind of meaning, just means making those kind of dramatic, necessary changes in society. If SCLC is going to have those kind of credentials, we've got to say those things and be those kinds of things. So we can't be tame on that. And I'm not going to mince words around the issue of which struggles we support and which ones we don't. And we're out there on all the ones that clearly are identifiable as human rights and civil rights struggles. And we're going to be there. Folks give me the call to be somewhere, I'm going to be there. So they can make whatever assumptions they choose. And clearly gay baiting is one of the kinds of things that people try to use to try to limit people from engaging in that struggle, to lessen their credibility. And it's one that I'm not going to let deter me from the kind of things that I will do or what the organization will do on this issue at all.
Now, as black folks dealing with our full plate, and I fundamentally believe that the issue of race and sexual orientation and poverty and all those issues, they in fact are on the plate. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here on this issue? What is the responsibility? It's two questions, I guess. What is the responsibility of the traditional black civil rights community to deal with this issue? And the second part is, what is the responsibility of African American gays and lesbians in regard to our own visibility and liberation within our black communities and our obligations to the rest of the plate?
Well, I think, first of all, there needs to be, and I think it's beginning to happen, a reassessment of what the agenda of the civil rights movement is. I think that folks have to be critical and self-critical of the role of traditional civil rights organizations and what is the new mandate. Clearly, it's not 1966 anymore. There's a whole different thing going on in America, and civil rights organizations have to make those changes and adopt it with the changing realities of America are. There are clearly other things to be done and struggled for, and there has to be a new movement constructed, new forces constructed. The gay and lesbian movement is part of that broader mosaic we have to weave together to build this new movement for civil rights and human rights in America. Because the old one is pretty fractured, you know. So we have to construct this new movement that will, we hope, certainly change America. One of the things that I think that black gays and lesbians can do is be much more visible and much more vocal about these kinds of issues. I think Kevin alluded to that a bit earlier, where folks have got to stand up and challenge people, you know, on those kind of issues when they hear clearly homophobic things being said, and say, hold it, time out, you know? So folks have got to declare that, and I'm not saying folks, again, go back to some macho trip and want to stand up and jam people up and get physical with folks. I'm just saying people have to stand up for what is right and challenge people, you know, right? And it's like being black, being at a cocktail party and somebody tells one of those crude jokes, and you turn your back and keep drinking. So you need to put that drink down and say, hey brother, wait a minute. See? So I think folks have got to be vocal on that issue and make it uncomfortable for people to be homophobic.
Not just gay and lesbian folks, though.
Yes, everybody. See, the onus, you're right, because the onus isn't just on gay people to do that. It's on me when I hear that. Because see, again, just finishing this thought, if I'm there, and it's not the black joke, but it's a homophobic joke, and I say, yeah, well, it ain't about me, so you know, I'll just listen to that and ha ha ha. See, I think folks have to really intervene in that and say that's inappropriate. That's really inappropriate. I don't appreciate it, because then people will I think begin to feel very uncomfortable because they won't know when they can or when they can't, make those kind of comments. And hopefully they'll make them less and less and less, and hopefully won't make them at all. So I think one is to be much more vocal and try to intervene in a lot of the struggles that are going on, to be, as you say, they've always been there, but in fact to more and more, try to include themselves in the kind of struggles that are going on internal to the community.
Well, I can't imagine how the time went by so fast, but the whole time for the segment has gone by. So I want to thank you very much, Joe, for being here. Joe Hicks,
I was very glad to be
Executive Director, SCLC of Greater Los Angeles. It's wonderful that you were here. I really enjoyed it. And speaking of enjoying, thank you for co-hosting, Phill. It was really nice. I think we ought to do this all the time.
Absolutely.
So much more fun with a co-host.
This has been really, really fun, and I want to thank you for your invitation. Now, this is a really important subject.
I think it is too. Well, what do you think we sort of learned today?
Well, I think that we learned that homophobia impacts everyone. Now, and as we highlighted homophobia in the black community, that also impacts all of us, and all of us have a responsibility. Now, the larger gay and lesbian community has a responsibility to deal with its inclusive issues, now has a responsibility to build new coalitions. Black gays and lesbians need to stand up and be more visible, and both inside of our community and wherever we go, because I fundamentally believe as more people know us, they have no choice but to love us. And for the black community, homophobia has a terrible cost. Now that we lose resources. Now, we are in a major battle to survive, and we need every soldier now that is willing to fight, and we cannot afford to discard any one of them.
You're right. I couldn't say it better. I'm not going to say another word except thank you very much. And all of you out there, African American, Asian American, Chicano, Native American, women, men, straight, gay, lesbian, whatever you are, get used to it. See you next time.